All right, we've started the recording.
Okay, well, I welcome everybody. I appreciate everyone showing up. I'm super excited about this event. Like I said, we've done a few of these now, and so yeah, happy to keep going. So welcome to the event, Managing Software Teams in Seattle meetup. Agenda for the day, we're going to do a little bit of introduction. We're going to pass it over to Leah for our guest speaker today, talking about job levels, and then we'll do some breakout groups and networking session, and then jump into a large Q&A for the last 30 minutes. So we'll be done at 7 p.m. Eastern time for those of you in New York. Okay, so yeah, if you're here, put your video up. Try to stay on mute unless you're talking, and then ask clarifying questions as we go. We've all super familiar at this point with virtual meetings, unfortunately. So why are we here? So a little bit of background on me. My name's Nate Amadon. I run a firm in Seattle, Form 100 Consulting, and hire former military officers and bring them into software development teams to help with agile practices, processes, really gain alignment, communication, get everyone on the same page. And you know, in the Air Force, when I was a cargo pilot. So I flew the C-17 plane. It's a huge cargo plane. If you've been in the military, you've probably been on one. And we talked a lot about leadership when I was there. We had a whole kind of support group of networking people I could reach out to. And I did a bunch of professional development training around leadership and management, really. And so when I got in the private sector, realized that there wasn't that same structure, and there wasn't a place where we could get engineering managers and leaders together to kind of do some of the stuff that's needed when you're doing this role, right? A lot of you hadn't had training. So this is a place where you should be able to do some professional development, hopefully do some networking as much as we can in the COVID world, and then learn from others. And we bring in great speakers, and you know, hopefully you get some actionable insights out of this. And that's the goal. Learn something, meet somebody new, you know, take a moment to get out of the grind of day-to-day development, and you know, and try to think about what you can do for your team. So I went to Ron with this idea, and Ron Lichty's wrote the book on this topic. So it's when I said, let's do this. And so we started now. October or November is going to be like 2 years of running this meetup. So it's been really cool. We've got some great speakers. We're really excited about this one. So yeah, that's why we're here, and that's what we're doing. Ron?
So I to go a little more background on that. So I was in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, for decades. Began living also in Seattle 3 years ago, and thought I helped organize a group called Silicon Valley Engineering Leadership Community for this exact purpose, for exactly this kind of thing, bringing on great insights from speakers as well as networking. And our motto is that relationships last longer than jobs, and networking is really useful to those of us in software leadership, because it's really true. Relationships do last longer than jobs. As well as a second motto of become the kind of leader you've always wanted to work for. And hopefully between speakers and between networking and being able to have people to reach out to, we can all become the leaders that we've always wanted to work for. So do you want to flip to the next slide? If you want my book, or if you're not so sure, but you might someday want my book, take a screenshot of this so you take advantage of the 35% off author code. And I'll say that while I add that Leah's here tonight in part because Casper proposed her. So we're going to let Casper introduce her. But I want to say that between San Francisco and here, I've never, and I've attended a bunch of meetups in a bunch of other places, I've never seen this topic addressed. And I consult with software engineering managers and VPs of engineering and CTOs, and I'm working with 4 of them now who said, help me work on job laddering. My team desperately wants some sense of where they are. So I'm really looking forward to this, Leah. And with that, let's turn it over to Casper to introduce Leah.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, here we go. Yes, so I was browsing the internet and looking around. I'm interested as well in the topic of how can we build a leveling for my team, for my software team, and how to build that up. And but besides that, I discovered without this particular topic, but I got to Leah Melvoin that is here today and will speak to us about this topic. I found her on the web asset, like talking about to another startup regarding her work she has done in the last 15 years for Amazon, where she grew and managed the Voice of the Development Initiative to advocate for the company's worldwide STEM population. And that sounded very intriguing to me. So what she did there, she researched the concerns and articulated the issues impacting the STEM population, and either personally resolved or influenced the resolution of hundreds of problems impacting those engineers and their management. And beyond that, she also created and managed an annual engineering-focused tech survey that used kind of a working backwards approach, where questions were designed around what engineers would want senior leadership to know, rather than questions designed around what leadership wants to know. So, sorry in the background, my dog is barking. But yeah, so and then the last few years of the 23 years. Sorry, it's my son.
Mommy needs help picking up the car.
Okay, I'm right there. Okay. So sorry for that. So Leah spent her last few years at Amazon with the Global Talent Management Organization, where she created the company-wide Amazon Job Level Guide. And we are especially interested today in that part of her work. And now, since 2020, she's offering her expertise as a consultant and has already worked with numerous companies, including the ones listed here on the slides. So thank you again, Leah, for taking the time today and speaking to us.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm excited. So do we do the polls first, or?
Sure, we can. So we can do the first 2 questions.
Okay.
All right. So launching the poll. It looks like you get all 3 questions at once, or what do you see?
Oh, I'm seeing 2.
I
I see. I have to do
you
it.
see all 3.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
sorry about that, Leah.
I don't know what's going on. Are people getting polled right? Oh, I see what's happening.
I received 3 different questions at
Great.
once.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm a poll rookie.
I don't know what I'm doing either. I've never done it. Interesting.
I think, Leah, for you, it's just, for us, I think it's just to look at what everybody is saying.
I
Since
see.
we are hosts, it's also the first time I see this.
Great.
Cool.
Great. So we have 11 of 15 participants in. 12.
Right.
All right. It's probably good.
That's probably good.
Cool.
Okay. Should I end the poll?
Sure. You go ahead. Go for it.
Okay. All righty. Well, I'll share the results, I guess. We
Cool.
kind of are evenly split in terms of management duration, like how long people have been managing Couple people are working for companies with no levels, other companies with majority, and it's either not at all useful or somewhat useful, which is pretty typical. Cool. Right. Good to go. All right. So I will share my screen and we will get to it. So what I'm going to talk about today is what's happening here. Why job level definition is important, some typical problems that are associated with folks' job level content, and what I think of as a better approach, specifically for engineering leveling, but in general, I think a better approach for leveling is something that I refer to as skills-based. It's a little bit more objective. So why do we even have job levels? And the first and foremost is to identify skills, capabilities associated with junior versus senior talent. For a small company with less than 100 people, you know, you don't even really need levels. Everybody's kind of, you have SDE, you have an engineering manager, but at some point someone comes in and says, well, I should be a senior. And that is the birth of having to articulate the difference. It also is a method for establishing compensation and how that aligns maybe to other companies and what they pay for similar work performed. It gives you an opportunity for career paths, but I think the most important reason for leveling is because it is the mechanism to support fair and consistent hiring practices and management practices. It's one of the few ways that you can start to remove bias from the equation, especially if that content is more objective. So I'm going to just make this a bit larger. Leveling is actually, job levels go and are a key part of many decision-making processes that are involving talent, from what level do I think I need, or what type of engineer do I need, to the questions that are asked, to how that level has been determined at hire, to the kind of compensation package that's been offered. If that level was misleveled, you get the wrong compensation package, which can give the wrong signals. I mean, you name it. It feeds into a lot of things. And so whenever you start to talk about, you know, well, nobody can get promoted to a certain level in the company, or everyone stalls out at a certain point, you know, your job level content is part of the problem. So companies with no levels are, you know, they're out there. And like I said, when it's small, it's totally fine. But when you get large, like let's say Netflix, I'll poke at them for just a second. I asked an engineer there how they, you know, whether or not they had levels, because I had heard that they didn't. And she told me that her compensation package differed by the years of experience she had, which I felt was a little bit suspect. You know, years of experience does not indicate skill, it's just experience. You can have people with a lot of years of experience who really aren't that good as an engineer. And so to make packages differ by that, I think is problematic. The other thing I notice in companies that have no levels is that they have no levels for their ICs, but their managers and their management track absolutely has levels. Manager, senior manager, director. Sometimes they just skip senior manager and go straight to director and VP. So it appears that the only growth path is if you're in management. And then the last lever about rewarding excellence is you only have so many levers that a company can pull to showing people that you recognize what their contributions are. One is financial, the other like bonuses or that kind of thing. You can do a love them or lose them kind of, you know, giving them an award, or do all kinds, giving them blogging opportunities. But the reality is promotion is the tried and true way to say we recognize that you've achieved something. So the typical job leveling approach is coming from Radford or companies like it. This is an example of their career ladder. And it all looks fine. You're like, oh, well, here's my ladder. You know, my support levels start here and my professional. But then when you start to look at it, in practice is where it starts to fall apart. The use of the word expert has been known to demotivate women and other minorities within populations. You have at grade 6 here, 3 levels that are 2 IC levels that are, one is a level 2 professional and the other one is a level 5 specialist. You know, a manager, if you end up using both of these, a manager is not going to know the difference between these two. And often non-exempt, exempt classifications are keying off of your grades, your lower grades, your support model. And so when you start getting into, I have 2 people, one's paid hourly, one's paid salary, and we level them exactly the same, then, you know, now it's starting to get a bit confusing. And then the third problem is, you notice in terms of Bradford's terminology, they've used the word senior for the support level, which we often use for higher level professionals. So this starts to confuse lateral transfers. As much as these words shouldn't matter, they absolutely do matter, because when a company gets larger, how you scale is via this content, is one of the ways you scale. And you can't go explaining to everybody that a senior support engineer is different than a senior software developer. People inherently know it, but they don't always. Another example, this is actual company example, is this level 1 through 6 guideline. And on the surface, it looks like, okay, you know, I've seen these. This is Amazon's content was really similar early on. But there are so many problems with this. My favorite part is the level 4 uses skills to drive company objectives and achieve goals. And then at level 5, somebody's now a guru, and level 6 is a superstar. Again, using these words that are known to really, you know, be, you know, sort of somewhat demotivating for a lot of people. And so, you know, the content like this, it seems like it helps you, but if you look at it and the way that it progresses, you can see that like at level 1, they can resolve routine issues and problems. Level 2 doesn't apparently need to do anything of the kind. And by level 3, they resolve most issues and problems effectively. What just happened here? And then at level 4, they solve most issues and problems. Apparently, they don't need to be effective at it. And you see how these inconsistencies start to happen. And so that's why the wording you use really matters in a leveling content. And you have to look at how you are stepping it up. So if you start to develop content for your company, this becomes a real issue. So here's what I think about with skills-based expectations. And I'm just going to use the software developers as an example because it's a really good example. And so to start with, I'm going to talk about what an entry-level software developer is not. This is what we would think of as the intern level. They have no industry experience. They are a beginner coder. They are learning CS fundamentals, data structures. They are still learning software design. They are learning about security, privacy, data handling. They don't know how to test. They don't know the needs of a production environment. You're going to learn that in an internship. Sometimes knowing what something is not helps you understand what something is. And so when we think about our entry level, and this is an Amazon entry level, and pretty consistent, I think, with Google and Facebook, you're looking at somebody that they do have a grasp of CS fundamentals and ideally data structures, but for sure algorithms. This is what's going to be in any computer science graduation. You know, somebody who's graduated is going to have this. They can be given well-defined requirements and turn them into code, but their style may need work. Their solutions may be brute force and overly complicated. Your entry-level SDE should not be given an ambiguous project working without a lot of supervision and without senior engineers on a team to go to for guidance, right? They may be able to write code, but it's important to know who they are and who they're not. And whether or not your company has leveling content, knowing what an entry-level SDE can do for you helps you see whether or not you have this type of work. So we can all hire, I mean, entry-level SDEs are a dime a dozen. You can get a lot of them. But when they are still learning software design, they may not know how to refactor. They don't know how to provide a constructive code review at this point. They don't understand how to make their software maintainable. These are all things they're going to learn in that first year or two of their work. You only want a ratio of maybe, if you had 10 engineers, maybe 4 of them could be lower level software engineer ones. Really, the powerhouse of the software engineer community is the SDE2, that mid-career software developer. And these are the high quality coders. We can say everything we want about entry-level SDEs. Sure, they may write high quality code, but we all know that there's a lot of leeway with entry level. But by the time somebody is promoted to that next level, they should know proper error handling. They should have some decent style, and they should have some grasp on design approaches. This level is really the level that we can give someone that, something isn't fully fleshed out yet. They are probably the best level to start with. If you're starting something new, having a team of software developer 2s and 3s is a great way to go, because they're going to know when they don't know something and they're going to push for more detail. Often what I notice as one of the larger problems between leveling software developers is this ambiguity scenario, because it's actually the ambiguity that somebody can work in that is the differential between being entry level and being an actual mid-career. They should know what it takes to make something maintainable to some degree. I mean, if the team has a DevOps team, then maybe they do that for them. But what they're still learning is how to negotiate and influence constructively. I used to joke about SDE2s being kind of the middle child of the software engineer community, because they're still learning how to pick their battles. And I think that something happens when somebody is starting to grow into a senior engineer. They develop more of a critical mindset than they might have had ordinarily. Strangely enough, the most critical software developers, especially at SDE2 or that version of SDE2, are actually, they're the budding leaders of the next generation. And it's not always evident that they are so. They are seeing the problems. They're starting to recognize that this short-term hack is going to have long-term consequences. They are recognizing when they haven't been given enough information, and they get more frustrated with product managers and program managers and with their own manager and with their team. These are very common examples of anti-patterns at this level. But I actually think that they speak to somebody who is beginning to form the mentality of the senior SDE level. And when you recognize that, you can start to orient them more productively, giving them things that are more challenging, and beginning to coach them about how to influence and how to pick their battles and how to help weigh in on prioritization without getting frustrated by things not going their way. The other thing about an SDE2 is that while they understand design approaches, they understand how to code, they can give you a variety of the solutions. At this level, they can do a lot of work, but they are still potentially going to overcomplicate things, which is really where we get to the next level. And I kind of have my warning here for promotion-oriented architecture, something that we joked about at Amazon, but it's legit. Whenever we're trying to promote somebody to senior SDE, we often give them a complex system to create, complex service. We frame it. We don't frame it as solving a complex problem. We say, go create this complex thing. And, or we have something arbitrary, like, it has to be able to create a service from end to end, or has to be able to deprecate a service or deprecate an API. You can come up with all sorts of reasons for doing it. But the reality is that at this juncture is when we start creating things for the sake of promotion, not for the sake of what's good for the company. And if you haven't read an article about why, there was like a why I left Google article that was kind of a couple of years ago, where an engineer was talking about the moving to criteria causing so much friction because the way that they were promoted, they were kind of forced into pigeonholing. So I'm going to talk about what a senior SDE is supposed to do for you. First of all, they can work independently. This is definitely a level where they will seek their own coaching. You do not need to step in on them. They are at the peer level with most engineering managers. They have advanced coding and design skill. They know when their solutions are not going to scale. They understand different features and how they can limit extensibility. They can be given complex problems and projects with ambiguous requirements and be designated a lead on a particular product offering. So they can actually help with the segmentation of a large project and deconstruct it into smaller stories so that they can be working in parallel with others. It's really the beginning of force multiplication. But the other thing about them and what we should be expecting from them is at this level, they should recognize when something is going to make systems more complex, and they need to be able to articulate those problems and begin to influence their team to go towards solutions that we would call more appropriately simple. There was a very interesting promotion case many years ago that I was asked to review, where a senior an SDE2 that was being promoted to SDE3. Originally, the project was scoped at 2 years of a build our own sort of solution for a retail organization. What the the SDE did was he found third-party technology that would take a lion's share of the coding out of this situation. All they were going to have to do was bootstrap it and put a front-end layer on that could feed into the APIs properly. It took the effort from 4 SDEs from 2 years down to 1 SDE for less than 6 months. And when it came to promotion, the directors said, well, they used open source software. They didn't really do anything. And it's like, but that's what you expect a senior engineer to do, to be able to find solutions that are going to get you to market quicker, that are going to be easy to maintain, and they're going to be able to articulate the risks and benefits from those choices. And they may still be able to build it. You could still have that person go and build it, or they could potentially influence you to go a different direction. And time will tell whether their ideas were more appropriate or not. And so the hardest problem with the senior SDE level is the concept of being respected by their peers. We tend to think of senior SDEs in many different ways. If you're at a small company, often there's title inflation, and someone could be called a senior SDE really as you just become an SDE, then a senior SDE, and then they start pushing these higher titles down lower, which I tend to think of as like getting a promotion without really earning it. And you can, find lots of examples in industries where, you'll have account managers that are vice presidents and at 22, because it gives you more confidence in their capability. But the reality is, when we think of a senior SDE in our org design, we have an expectation of what they can do. We assume something about them with that title. And I think that the main thing we assume is that they can be considered a technical leader by their own team, that they understand what best practices are, and that they know how to drive them, and that the solutions that they put forward are correct and are going to scale properly, et cetera. To use that title for someone that does not know how to do those things, well, that's doing the company a disservice, because people are going to assume that that's who they are based on the naming. So it's just something to think about there. So one of the problems we had at Amazon was, as we got very large, we lost the thread about what a senior software developer was versus what we call a principal SDE, which is our level 7 software engineer. Teams, as we were dividing and scaling up, one of the things that we did was, we would often assign a senior SDE to oversee several teams while we were potentially hiring a manager, or, there was just too many juniors. And so the senior SDE would be tapped to kind of be a resource for maybe a couple of groups, or they were doing the projects that crossed large numbers of teams. And this all seemed fine until we realized that people weren't getting promoted to principal. And what we found was because we had somehow moved that scoping down to a senior SDE level. And that had the effect of creating a very large gap between what an SDE2 was and a senior SDE is. This has now been solved for many years. And now they're, through a lot of effort of level clarification, we made it very clear that at the senior SDE level, this person is they're like a big fish in a small pond. They are a technical leader for a team. They can maybe improve the technology interactions with dependencies, but it is not their job to oversee multiple teams. That is the job of a principal SDE, or you could call them a staff engineer or senior staff, or however fellow, there's all different words that people use for these higher levels. But there's a demarcation between doing something for one team and now crossing teams and doing something, overseeing the architecture, or being on point as a technical resource for, say, 3 or 4 teams under a director. That is somebody that's either being stretched to go to this level, or they are this level. And it's really important to keep your eye on this, because as companies scale up, as they get bigger, this is one of the things that starts to happen. It's like this bloat at the senior SDE level that is almost like 2 levels at once. And you can tell that the problem is there because people will start saying, we need more levels. And it's not more levels that's going to solve the problem. It's clarification between levels, and the fact that scope got muddied at that level 6. It's super common. I think every company that I have consulted for since Amazon, I've been stunned how everybody's saying the same things. So it's at level 7, we think of them as mature tech leaders, and force multipliers is one of the key, concepts that we use for this level. But they really are like exemplary practitioners. They set the standard for coding and design. They really know how to, they can be put on all your big stuff. But they're really there to be kind of in concept, this broadly applied engineer. The wrinkle are depth engineers, depth focused. And so you need to understand the impact that's required at a particular level to make sure that if you have a depth engineer, that they are satisfying the impact and complexity requirements. Too often we think of depth as knows everything about this particular team's stuff, systems. And that's not depth. Depth is, I could write the book on this. I am so knowledgeable in a particular area. At Amazon, we had people who were depth engineers, somebody who was a front end who was knew everything about fonts. And in hardware, we had somebody that they spent their whole career designing glass, for pad applications or phone applications. It's the same thing in software. You can have embedded SDEs. They can be a form of a specialist, but your depth SDEs are not always going to be the best at spreading themselves around, and it's not fair to expect them to. But but they do need to add value in other ways. The other thing that I think at this level 7, whether you call it a staff or a principal SDE, the job is fundamentally different in that they have a seat at the table with senior leaders. They need to be able to influence effectively. They need to be able to negotiate a path forward, especially during complex or critical situations. And they also need to be doing a lot to bring up the next generation. And so often, people that are at this architect level take all the oxygen out of the room, and they can absolutely build resentment by their behavior. So the anti-pattern to watch out for there is how do they team build? Are they a bully? Do they kind of overcast too much of a shadow amongst the team, or are they bringing people up and making sure voices are heard and giving, engineers with less experience opportunities, et cetera. They need to be good coaches. So I could go into higher SDE levels, but it's fair to say that they are going to go broader or more complex or higher impact. But there's a couple of things that higher SDE levels do that other levels don't. The first is a higher SDE level might be the role that is tapped to evaluate an industry, like an acquisition. They would be looking at the engineering workforce and the architecture and reporting back to, the senior leadership interested in purchasing that company, what kind of technology assets they were actually bringing in, or whether or not they were bringing in security risks, et cetera. This is very common for that level, and they can be often, having to work in some pretty secretive situations because obviously these negotiations are highly confidential. The second thing that they can be tasked to do is to design something that is disruptive. They may actually have people under them for a period of time, or they're one of a group of another higher level engineers, and they're just working on something that's a pilot that you think might actually be a significant product. And those are also things that you might see. But I think the most controversial thing with higher SDE levels is, do we expect them to code? And I think that it's a company decision. At Amazon, we expect hands-on. Other companies, they think of them as architects, and there's no coding requirement anymore. Whatever it is, you need to be consistent about it. You can't just have one group of people expected to do it and others don't. That would be something you want to make sure you're clear on. The other controversial topic is fungibility. So what I've described in these generic levels is your kind of common full stack. The front-end SDEs have some different scoping, but their abilities, tend to be very similar. It's just that it's oriented towards front-end. Data engineers, applied scientists, very similar type of scoping, but towards the type of work that they do. But when you start getting into, expecting a specialist to just pick up new languages, if you're going to do that as a company, I actually think that the honest thing to do is to tell somebody when they are in the interview process, regardless of your specialization, we're going to expect you to pivot and learn Java or learn Python or pick this up or go, we do everything in Go. You need to let them know that they're going to be expected. You can't hire a mobile SDE and then put them on to everything not mobile and expect to retain them. They're going to feel pretty disrespected. People, especially in engineering, a lot of us will have careers, and niche experts they do exist. And so I think it's just important to be upfront about it. So with that, I will stop and let us all go into breakouts, and we can see whether or not what I'm describing holds water.
All right.
Okay. So we've got 16 people here. Should we set up 4 breakout rooms?
Yeah, let's do 4. For sure. So breakout rooms, about 15 minutes. Really, this is a networking piece. Just introduce yourself, get to know, introduce yourself, ask people questions, figure out where they work, figure out what they do. And then really the goal at the end is to have a question that you want to ask. You want to ask Leah at the end of the event. So you'll get a 1-minute warning pop up, and then you'll jump back into the main screen. We'll Q&A until probably about 7 o'clock.
Okay, so again, introduce yourselves, talk about what your questions are, come back with one question or tiered or a backlog, a prioritized backlog of questions. See you all back here in 15 minutes.
Curious, Leah, curious from your point of view, Leah, with Amazon's bar raiser program that we've heard about, where every new hire should raise the bar and be better than the average person at that level. Do you believe that still? Do you, when are the right times to take chances on people and level them there, or when's the right times to down level?
Well,
That's
also,
a really great question.
right?
Yeah, well, mistakes can be costly at certain levels, right? At an entry level SDE, if they're still learning certain things, could you lean in and bring them on? Sure, but the danger is they might move slower, they might not make it. And so, you know, hiring obviously is going to be a little tricky just because it's a company decision about whether or not they are risk averse or more sort of generous with leveling. For the real problem comes in, and this is why most companies bottleneck at your senior principal kind of levels, is because those levels have influence. If you have a senior SDE that is a complicator, then they are now going to teach and drive that complication. They're going to spread it. It's going to be like a virus, right? And they leave a legacy of systems that are very, very difficult. And so the point of a bar raiser is ideally to have somebody that is deeply, deeply understanding the levels and can weigh in and make sure the interview process was handled fairly and appropriately, and, you know, good questions were asked, and that they are helping to fine tune that level placement. My problem with down leveling is if you don't understand the levels well, then what happens is you go, well, this person didn't really seem like a leader, and senior SDE is kind of a leadership position of a team. And so I'm going to down level them to SDE 2. Even though the person might have 10 years experience, they fill every other bucket on the list, but you've somehow decided that they're not a leader. These words are sort of interesting and important. And what happens is that typically hits introverts and people who have low self-esteem. That doesn't mean they're not leaders. It just means in that interview process, and it may be that they present differently, that you didn't get the indication that they were a leader. And now that person is going to spend however many years trying to show you that they were what you should have hired them at. And worse, their compensation has now been impacted. And so that's why certain words are a bit loaded, and in a bias can kind of squeak in and, you know, and cause you to make decisions. And so, like I said, you know, to sum it up, the company needs to decide whether or not they are going to lean in or that they're risk averse. And if they do that, they should be consistent, right? Don't be risk averse with some people and lean in on others. Decide what your policy is. If you're going to lean in, I would rather see people leaning in on promotion than leaning in on hire, because more people are going to fail at hire than they are with promotion.
I like that a lot. Leaning in on promotion versus hiring. It's a great one.
Because it's always harder to get promoted than to be hired. And it's maddening for the engineers. They're like, what, I can do 5 hours of interviews and become a principal engineer, but I can spend 4 years working projects only to have my promotion consistently deferred because I'm not building consensus, right? You know, I mean, it's crazy, right? So I think I'd rather that we see a little bit more leaning in on promotion. And I also think for that SDE 1 to SDE 2 level, companies could actually avoid a lot of work just by having auto promotions for entry level to the next level, with managers opting out. So instead of it having to make a case for promotion at those lower levels, you're automatically going to move in at a certain point, because we just know that pretty much everybody at 2 years is going to make it. And then the manager should just say, no, I still think they need more time. They could pull somebody out of the promo rather than having to make a case for promo. If you do something like that with those lower levels, then your time spent on the higher levels where it needs to be, right? And I think that can save a lot and make put the focus where it should be, and not spend a lot of time frittering away on lower levels that, you know, there's no risk if they get promoted. And, you know, SD 1, SD 2, it's not a big deal.
Super. It's on mute. Really, really interesting, Leah. So group 2 got Leah in your group.
Okay,
so
we were group 2.
I think the question for group 2 is, did you have a conversation that has a question around it that you think that the whole group should benefit from?
And
Yes, we nominated a couple to share with the group. I think the first one is, how do you think about partial matches for the job criteria, especially if some seem like deal breakers or deal makers? Is there another level of detail in those qualifiers?
Okay, I'll start with that. I think that there are the soft skills stuff does not matter so much at the lower levels, whether somebody can clearly communicate. To be honest, it's not that big of a deal at SDE1 and even SDE2, as long as they, then so, like I'll give an example. I remember being at the Japan office, and there was a requirement that Japanese software developers speak English as a English solidly, but they're doing features for Japanese customers. And I remember thinking how strange that was. And it was all about being able to communicate with other teams. But the reality is that that shouldn't have mattered. Somebody could take an ESL course when they join and just pick up some small things, as long as they're focused for the customer. But at a senior level, that does matter. And so really at the main thing is being able to write functionally correct code should just be a deal breaker. If somebody can't do that for the entry level, they can't do it. But whether or not they can design solutions, or they know data structures, you can give them some books and give them some coaching and help them come up to speed on these things while they're in the job. But by the time somebody is a senior SDE, if they do not have a pretty solid understanding of industry technologies, design solutions, et cetera, I don't know how you could in good conscience not, require them to be that. If they are not good at building consensus or influencing, the danger is they will build resentment all around them. And that's the problem. And that's why those soft skills are a real pain in the ass for promotion and for success at the job. Being able to communicate with the right level of detail to the right audience starts to really matter at those senior levels. And so as much as you can say, do they need to have all the bullets? They kind of do. These are in there for a reason. But, if you have a principal engineer and they're not doing any mentoring, not doing any coaching, not doing any recruiting, not doing any of the presentations or any kind of stuff like that, you have to ask yourself, why are they getting out of having to do all this extra stuff when everybody else is expected to do it? It starts to look unfair.
That makes a lot of sense.
Cool. So can we go to group 3 for a question? Group 3, Mary, Mike, Ron.
I think we had a couple. So one was, it was the same, I think, as Ken's with, if the senior developer, if they don't meet all the criteria, is that okay?
It's your call. It's just think through deeply what the purpose of this job is. Who is this person, right? And I think, there was a second question that Ken sort of had that we didn't get to, and I think it might help with this conversation, which gets into org design. So if a team has existing systems that are only making incremental changes, you're doing little API changes, you're keeping the lights on, you're doing some package upgrades. Basically, there's nothing new that's really being developed from a substrate level. They're just kind of being evolved over time. You can have SDE1s and SDE2s. You don't even need a senior SDE on the team. But that team will also not be a feeding ground. It will not be a place where a senior SDE could grow. There wouldn't be any work for them because there's no complexity in that work. These are just small features. Likewise, on the flip side, if you have a team that is starting to create a pilot project, you don't want a bunch of SDE1s doing the coding on that, because if you really want that product to go to market and scale up, you're not going to be able to do that with SDE1 code. You can't, right? You've got to have engineers that understand what shortcuts to take and what shortcuts not to take. That will move you faster. And so the ratio of senior to junior needs to be higher in those cases. But once that product is launched and you're going through your active scaling, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. There's a lot of 2E projects. So you can have more SDE2s and even SDE1s in that scenario. But when you get too many senior SDEs on a team, all of a sudden you see the differences in the way they behave and act. And so you start wondering, you know, do I need to spread these SDEs out? And my rule of thumb is every team should have an SDE, senior SDE. Even the more junior teams, you know, with existing technologies, maybe they can just be, you know, if you're stretching a senior SDE to principal, you know, using Amazon's nomenclature for titles, then you could have like a senior SDE that's overseeing this little keep the lights on team and be there as a technical resource, but not actually be part of that team. You know, you can do that sort of thing, but it's the point of the way that I've done the leveling here is that these are personas that have capabilities, and it's about you knowing what it is you need to do and thinking through, in order for me to do this, I'm going to need these kinds of people. You know, my PM is in India, and everyone's going to have to work in different time zones, or I know that, you know, I don't have a product manager for this, and I'm going to need the SDEs to be doing a lot of the requirements gathering and figuring it out for themselves. Don't make that a low level thing, right? That can't be lower level. So the trade-offs are really with the product at that point.
Right.
Oh, and there was a question about the bar. This is a really good question. I forgot to answer that, and let me make sure. So our idea of, you know, we have this sort of, you know, euphemism, you know, we're always raising the bar in technology. And I don't think anyone really understands what that means. I think that they think it means, well, I just got this engineer to do these things, so I raised the bar. And the bar is really more, in order to maintain or raise a bar, you need to know what the bar for a level is. And that is those objective skills, right? What do I expect? What is articulated? Now, raising the bar is not moving the goalpost and getting a level to do something beyond its level and then saying, this is now my new definition for the level. So if we use the senior SDE example, raising the bar on the senior SDE role is not, this person was a senior SDE for one team, now I've given them 3 teams, so I raised the bar, right? Or I hired someone and I know that the role requires leadership of one team, or that they're just going to be chartered to work in one team. But, you know, I'm raising the bar because I got somebody that used to be a principal at another company, and I'm just I'm down leveling them into a senior SDE role. So I raise the bar. These are not raising the bar. Raising the bar is more akin to, do I now expect SDEs coming in to understand cell-based architecture? Do I expect SDEs coming in to have proficiency in ML? You know, what type of, it's all about making sure that they're current on their technologies and that that's, you know, appropriate for the level. It used to be that to require ML was like a niche expertise, and it might be a senior SDE that could do that for you. Now it's taught in every college. Everybody coming out, pick up a Python, and they can, you know, they can get some ML in. So why wouldn't that be an entry-level SDE requirement? AWS would be similar, or any kind of cloud-based technology. If somebody doesn't know that, they have just been off the truck for a decade. That would be taking too big of a risk. You know, they should be able to learn it, obviously, but it's like, that's not really raising the bar if somebody has skills that are languishing. So I think that's more akin to it.
All right, Teed, I want to notice that your hand's up, but I want to honor the process we called out first and give group 4 the chance to ask its question and then come to Teed for his question.
Sure. No worries.
Great. Group 4.
So Casper, I'm gonna go through. So when developing a job ladder from scratch, who do you involve? And specifically, do you involve the engineers in that process?
Maybe a couple of higher performing, higher level ones, but the problem when you involve SDEs in the process is that in the process of defining it is that anybody who's involved in the work group is naturally going to have a moment where they're going to realize that maybe what they're saying means they're not that level. And having done this, I mean, when I did the TPM effort at Amazon, I was like, I'm not going to have a job when this is done. I was so freaked out when I was documenting the requirements for a technical program manager. And then, by the time I did product management, I was a PMT then. I was like, God damn it, I'm not going to have a job. I mean, I was really freaking out, and it happens, especially with manager leveling. And so what you need is a cross-functional group, some, higher level SDEs, and some software managers and some senior managers and maybe one director. You kind of want a group that can talk it through, ideally with a baseline leveling content that it gives you something that steps up right. Radford is the standard that a lot of us are benchmarking our content on. And my problem with the Radford content is that it does not articulate scope well. They say things like department and company, and, they use these words that are not our org structure, and and those words are misleading, and it makes you think that. And so, this is kind of why I went into consulting. It's like, 1 hour of my time, I can kind of give you a tutorial on leveling, and I could speed you up, and it would take you 6 months to do it or 3 months to do it, and not a year or 2 years. That would be the idea, is just to be able to get you off on the right foot. So.
Teet?
Yes, so this was a question we also talked about in our group 2 there. The question is about how do you define, or how to differentiate challenging task and complex task, right?
Yeah.
This is a majority, because I had the same discussion with my upper management when we have for promotions or bonuses stuff, and then this is a debating question, right? Okay, this individual did a complex stuff, and it's a challenging task, right? How do we differentiate those two?
I actually came up with a model for making sure that leveling was hinged on some definitions, because you need to know what concepts are appropriate for each level. And the problem with the word complex is that we overuse it. We love that word, right? We say it for everything. It's like our ego. I built this complex thing. Oh, I'm working in this complex problem. And when you look at the words of what are synonymous with the word complexity, or the definition of complexity, we are all working in it all the time. I mean, my iPhone is by definition complex, right? And so every level can't be complex, can't use that word. So I'm very intentional. I don't use the word complex in any level except level 6. So level 4, which is the entry level SDE level, problems are what we call straightforward. Ambiguity is low, definition is clear, and the person is it's the beginning of the professional ladder. They're using their own skills. So they have the ability to perform a complex function like software development or being a project manager, or you name it. But we are intentionally not putting them on complex problems. I'd say that complexity would be attributed at an entry level of, they can potentially start to troubleshoot without documentation. That would be your entry level SDE. But expecting them to resolve the root cause, well, that could be a bit much, right? So that level 5, I use the word challenging. At Amazon, I called it difficult, but I think I like the word challenging better. And the definition is you can be given projects that and problems that are challenging, and that challenging means there's constraints, there's risks and blockers, and I've defined them as visible. You can see that they're there, and the challenge is they have to address the constraints, they have to mitigate the risks, and they have to overcome the blockers. And at level 5, they do that with some coaching, right? So they're not totally independent. I use complex for level 6 because complexity is really a factor of, now there is this problem where you can have risks, constraints, and mitigation, risks, constraints, and blockers, and they all conflict with each other. That's true complexity. To solve one problem creates another problem. And it's like you're trying to pull the knot, the strings on the knot, and the person now has to use judgment. This is what Radford is talking about. I'm now going to be using judgment, and I'm going to put forth a solution that's going to create some risk over here, but it solves these other 5 problems. So I am making a decision about short-term versus long-term, which is also the decision-making at level 6. And I'm addressing the constraints, but those constraints could be legal, they could be financial, they could be customer behavioral, they could be compliance and security. And that engineer now has to rationalize all of that and come up with the best solution that may not address all of them, but they're using their judgment. And that's what a level 6 is about. And then level 7, I use the words highly complex or significantly complex. And the definition for that is now some of these things are invisible at the onset. You did not know that it was going to happen. Expertise and experience and maybe just prior knowledge of stuff, you might be able to see around a corner and see it coming. That's how we used to frame it. But the person basically can be, they know enough to dig deep enough to try to ferret out those invisible risks and blockers and things that could bite you. And that's really that differential in complexity from 6 to 7. And then level 8, we just started to use the word our hardest problems. Like at that point, you're solving things that are unsolved in the industry. This is somebody that is tasked with these kind of MIT level problems. And they are, it's like energy storage, like that's a level 8 problem, right? You could have researchers that are PhDs working on these, but in order to do it, bring theoretical to market, you're going to need a real live senior engineer that can start to build something out of nothing. And Amazon Go was a great example of that, where we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We failed over and over and over again. And then eventually, came up with a solution, but it took somebody that was taking those inputs and starting to move it forward. You're really pushing into the unknown. And all the engineers in the world want this. They want this at like SDE 1. And companies will sell that. They'll say, this is what you're going to be doing here. You're going to be working on all these interesting problems. And then the engineers come in and they're like, I'm maintaining systems and I'm doing little low-level features, and they're pissed, right? And I actually think that it's better that if you can find a way to frame what each level does and how they're oriented, at least you're not blindsiding them with reality.
Thank you.
So we've got 3 minutes left. Nate, do we need to do a wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, maybe quickly, there's one question we didn't get to that was in the chat. That I think is just interesting around job verification. What does that job verification process look like?
Job
Sean, I want to add any context.
What is job verification? I'm sorry.
So Leah, this is Sean. You had mentioned, making sure that the people are at the right levels. And in my situation, I just inherited this organization, new job, and I'm wondering if everybody's leveled correctly. It's not that I don't trust that HR is, managing some of that, and the promotion conversations are valid in that, but if we're designing an org and hiring, we're hiring 30%, I got to make sure we're working a solid baseline.
Yeah. If your current company's job level content is weaselly or unclear, then it's a bit of a crapshoot whether or not you've got the right bench to build off of. But all you can do is you basically move forward being very intentional. So somebody is stated at a certain level, and you intentionally give them things that are that are appropriate for that level. And then you see how well they do at it, and you let them show you. I noticed that with engineers, there's like 2 types of failure. The first is they can't handle the ambiguity, which means that they've not learned how to program manage themselves, project manage themselves, and how to push for requirements. So that's usually your entry-level SDE that got pushed to SDE 2 too quickly. They're not really ready for it. Then the second is somebody is put in a leadership position and they're building resentment. They're making the wrong judgment calls and they're complicating things. And those are more difficult because you have to have someone. HR can't solve that problem. HR may not even know what the hell you're talking about, right? You notice it in the product proposals and feature proposals and design reviews where people will be coming forward and telling you, hey, this is our strategy, this is what we're going to do, and you're listening to it going, why the fuck are you doing it that way? I mean, you know what I mean? There's like literally an internal process where you're like, I don't think we should go down this road, and that's a danger sign. And as a leader, you've got to have that spidey sense. And this is why engineering managers, I think, need to be technical. I don't like the idea of people managing engineers that don't have the technical background because they don't have the gut check that will protect them from that. You can be less technical at higher levels, but low down at that front time, you need that skill.
Perfect. Well, awesome. Well, hey, we are right at time. Leah, thank you so much for
Great.
coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an awesome topic.
Yeah. Thanks.
And and for everyone on the call, thank you so much for attending. I think Ron will post something on YouTube eventually for this.
Great.
Uh-huh.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a good evening.
Yeah, and we'll probably do this again before the end of the year for sure.
Great.
So
Okay.
thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much.